the other side, so to speak. He is a notable figure in the financial world, currently serving as the CEO and Managing Director of Tata Capital. With his extensive experience and visionary leadership, he has been instrumental in driving Tata Capital's success and financial innovation. May I kindly request the esteemed Shri Rajiv Sabharwal to grace the stage and share his insights with all of us.
Good evening, everyone, respected minister, all the developers and dear friends. You know, Abhishek has spoken almost everything which I had in mind,
I learned from you.
I don't have any different opinion than what you said. I was just thinking about the fact that if the opportunity is so large, then we have to tap into it also. But what I see, and we've tried to really spread out across the country, and the more deeper we go in the markets, there's hardly any organized developer there. It's all about self-construction. You know, 90% of the business which we do in those markets is self-construction. So the opportunity is not only lying in this room, but you know, it's also about how can this industry go into those locations where the demand is. If you're talking about 10 crore houses, I can tell you not more than 10% will lie in the top 10 cities. 90% of that demand will be beyond the top 10 cities. And that is where we see that organized development is either very small or a lot needs to be done. But just talking about the fact that if we have to really scale up and reach to that demand, three things come to my mind. One is capital. You know, the industry will need capital, whether it comes in the form of debt, a combination of equity or any other means. But the industry will need far more capital than what it has today. The second thing is people. I completely agree with what was just said. You know, we have dearth of professionals who can really take this industry to the level at which we want it to be. You know, we have seen promoters growing and running these businesses. In the last 10 years, maybe we have seen a lot of professionals come into this industry. And I would see the top developers, you know, getting a team of professionals to run these businesses. But still, I believe that what we need is, you know, far, far more than what we have. And actually, the people sitting in this room have to develop those teams. Because you will develop them, people will leave you and join the next crop of developers and grow them and so on. That's how the industry works, and that is how this industry will work. So the responsibility of creating those leaders also lies with the team who's present out here. And the third thing is, I think we also need to, you know, get into standardization. You know, today every project seems to be different than the others. I'm not saying differentiation should not happen, but if we want to talk about scale, 90% of the things will need to be standardized. If we don't do that, it will be extremely, extremely difficult to scale. So how do we do that is going to be another challenge when we try to, you know, find differences for each one so that they can command a different premium than the others. So this is a challenge which the industry will face. One thing is very important, that financing is going to be critical. And if we pick up on what Abhishek said, and the fact that we don't want as much debt, then we will need more equity or some other form of equity. And if we need that, then a lot of the people present out here and many more will need to hit the market, will need to go public. When I see the data on entities who have gone public, I don't know the exact number, but I think about 25 or so developers would have gone public, or 25 to 30 developers would have gone public. But when I look at the numbers, and I was just seeing those numbers, only 6 of them have a market cap of more than 10,000 crores. Only 6 in this large industry. Only 1 has a market cap of more than 100,000 crores. Only 5 have given a cumulative annual return of more than 10% since the time they have listed. Only 5. The highest is obviously sitting out here. Abhishek just presented. The investors have made more money, in this stock than any other real estate stock. But, if we want more of equity to come in, if more companies have to get listed, then this equation will need to change. If more capital needs to come into this industry, then this equation will need to dramatically transform, which means more people will need to be out there and they will need to give much better return to investors so that the next crop of people can come and put money there. If we look at the life cycle, and I was just thinking about if capital markets is the way to go. Typically when any developer starts, it's usually the own capital plus private debt. That's typically the way a developer starts, and he or she starts growing in their business. And as business grows, we realize that it's the debt from financial institutions which replaces the private debt. So it's equity and debt from financial institutions, and that is what supports growth. And I completely agree, and I've been saying this for the last 20 years or so, that you should not take more debt, though it is against what we do, but the right way is to take as minimal a debt as you need. The right word is probably the optimal amount of debt, but since optimal is difficult to define, I think minimal is the right way. People should decide that they should take debt. And there are different ways and means to decrease this amount of debt. What typically happens is we tend to forget that these tools exist with us, which can allow us to reduce debt. A lot of times when we look at developers, when we are looking at proposals for debt, we find there are a lot of assets which are just not earning anything for a long period of time, which may not be core for the developers, but they are still there on their books. The best way is to convert them into cash. Get rid of non-core assets. I think we are in a situation where land is to be treated as a raw material and not as an investment tool. There was a time, maybe 20 years or 25 or 30 years back, when that was true, but today that is no longer true. And if you have to do it, then if you acquire land, then you have to convert it into cash. You can't keep it idle for a long period of time. It's only going to hurt you. The debt which you have taken for it is only going to hurt you. Similarly, big cities have evolved different models, whether it's a joint development or anything else where you don't need to put in your full capital. So the more you use some of these tools, you can reduce your debt. We've also seen, when people take debt, one thing is very important is you should always take debt if the return on your business is much more than the cost of the debt. At times, this equation goes faulty and it creates a problem. A lot of times, I have seen one of the reasons where, because of which challenges occur is the developer has stock, the developer can sell, but he expects a different price and consequently he holds the stock, not realizing that the cost of the debt is such that the price appreciation cannot ever pay for the increased debt which you carry for a longer period of time. Unfortunately, everybody agrees to this but does not implement it. And one of the biggest reasons we've seen why developers have entered into challenges is because they've decided that they want to sell only at a particular price and not convert what they have into cash. So, debt is important. According to me, I never say that you should not take debt. It's the right amount of debt or the minimal amount of debt. Debt is the only thing besides your capital which can support your growth during that phase. But taking the right amount of debt and holding only that much is going to be very, very critical for the success of developers. So while Abhishek did mention that debt causes collapse, but that debt is also something which has supported growth. There would be more developers who would have grown with debt than developers who would have collapsed with debt. So it is not about taking debt or not, but taking the right amount of debt, or let me put it another way, taking the minimal amount of debt. Once people cross this hurdle, people start moving towards private equity. So it's your own equity. Post private debt, it moves to institutional debt and then moves to private equity. Unfortunately, we've not really had private equity in the residential side. It's all been structured debt and debt at very high rates. So we need to create a market, and it can only be done by all of you as well as the private equity players, where we can see equity coming into residential real estate and not structured debt. Equity is something which, according to me, on which you have to give a return, but you're not bound by timelines in case there are challenges which you face in any particular quarters or any year or so. So we need, more of private equity to move to this industry, and it can only be done if private equity sees that their monies can be returned with reasonable returns, which is all in your hands. Once we cross this hurdle, I think the next thing which we look for is going public. While in the past developers have shied away from this source of capital, according to me, this is eventually the place which all of you will need to move towards. If you want to grow, if you want to be large players, then I don't think so there is an option. You will need to grow into this space. However, what is very important, and I'm also learning, because though in the past I've spent time in a company which was public, but we are now going to go public in a year and a half's time. And the more I talk to people, the more I realize that the models have to be such that you can predict your growth, and that rate can be what is right for the industry. For our industry, if it is 25%, it may be 15 or 20% for your industry. But you have to have a model which supports that growth. You have to have a model which allows for predictability, and more importantly, besides predictability, profitability. Unless and until both of them come together, I don't think so you will be able to give returns of at least 15% plus per annum to equity investors, which is the minimum they look for when they take risk with the equity. So governance standards are another thing which is extremely important. So if there is bad news, it should be disclosed earlier. Good news you can hold, but bad news you should disclose early. There should be nothing which your investors don't know of. And if they have to know of, they should know through you and not through gossip and other things or other means of communication. So I think the final evolution of going public is extremely important. this is an evolution which you will all go through. But creating a model which can sustain to give those returns and growth is very important. So there are, developers who think of going public, who are present in a micro market, and I just wonder whether that's the right thing to do. If you have to create a model which will sustain growth, you should be diversified. You should be present across many micro markets, ideally a few more cities. If possible, also in commercial and retail, so that the proportions could be different, but it is important that you're present in different segments, because that will allow you to sustain during difficult times when they come. So I just want to end up by saying that for your growth, capital is important. You choose the way you want to get it, whether it is in the form of debt, whether it's public equity or private equity. I think in the end you will need all of them, but the proportion you have to choose, which de-risks you from any eventuality which may hit the market. I'm sure there are a lot of people who have done this successfully, and there's a lot to learn from people who have done this successfully in this room. So thank you very much and wish you the very best.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your insights. May I please invite Mr. Haresh Masani, MD Highback, Mr. Bandish Ajmera, and Mr. Shailesh Puranik to felicitate our guests.